Welcome back to Sliver and Bite TV. Today we're making caramel slice. As always, start by lining your baking tray. Just makes it a lot easier when you are starting to prepare your crust that it's ready just to dump in. So cut a piece of parchment paper, the correct size, and put your baking tin over the top and cut in from the corners, and it'll fit just snug. Put that to the side for later. Now we're going to melt our butter. Make sure you're putting that on reheat. You don't want to put it on hot, otherwise your butter will explode. And that goes into a large or medium size mixing bowl. Make sure you're scraping out all of the butter, because if you have weighed that out correctly, you don't want to leave half of it in there. In with the brown sugar and mix thoroughly. And now in with the desiccated coconut and plain flour. Making sure you're mixing this thoroughly. You don't want any dry parts in your crust. You'll see that I've used gloves to pat down the crust into the baking tin, mainly because it's actually quite buttery and oily, so I didn't want to get it all over my hands. So push that down as evenly as possible into the corners, and then you'll see I use a spatula just to flatten it out and move any of the lumps that are too high in one area into another. And then that is into the oven at 180 for 12 minutes. We're going to get started on the caramel now. So the butter into the saucepan along with the vanilla extract, making sure that you're consistently moving the butter and the extract around. You don't want it to stagnate. You don't want any burnt parts of the butter. So make sure you're fluctuating the heat accordingly. Once all of your butter is completely melted, we can go ahead and put in our brown sugar. No. We're going in with some treacle. This will make the caramel slice nice and rich. If you wish to have a more mild taste, you can stick with the brown sugar, or somewhere in between with the golden syrup. Combine that well. Making sure that you're stirring consistently, as you also don't want this to burn. Now we can go in with our condensed milk. You want to do this on a low heat for now, and then you can increase to a medium once it's combined. You'll see that I'm putting the whisk on an angle, and what I'm doing is getting one of the wire loops into the very corner of the saucepan, because you don't want anything to stick into that corner and not be incorporated. As you can see, just removed the biscuit base out of the oven. You can leave that to the side to cool for a little. And don't forget to wipe down the sides of the saucepan just to make sure that you're getting all of that caramel incorporated. And once you start seeing large bubbles, it's certainly thick enough to turn off the heat and pour over the biscuit base. When you're pouring it over, it's great at this point because gravity will do its work and it'll spread out evenly. That's into the oven at 180 for 12 minutes, making sure you're checking on it just in case it burns. So a light brown is okay. Once that's cooled, you'll be able to start working on your melted chocolate. So I have my dark chocolate, so this is 70% cocoa. I'm putting it into the microwave with 20-second bursts just to soften it up and melt it down. When you're getting to your third or fourth time in the microwave, reduce it down to 10 seconds because you don't want to overheat it, because overheating it will affect the taste and the consistency. As you can see, there are some large pieces of chocolate in there. If they were half or even just under half that size, the remaining heat of the melted chocolate would melt that down and you would be okay. However, they're a little bit large, so I've put it back in just for 10 more seconds. And I'm also starting on the white chocolate. White chocolate is a little more volatile, so you'll only want to put that in for 15-second bursts and just being very ginger, maybe even reducing that down to 5 to 7-second bursts, just because it has a different makeup than a cocoa chocolate. So just be careful with that. And you'll see what I do with the white chocolate. It's a little decorative effect. They're both at perfect consistency. Time to grab yourself a piping bag and either use a cup to stand it up in or just fold it down, and then pour in your white chocolate. And then just push that to the side to use a little later on. It's now time to pour the dark chocolate over the caramel. I put it on a slight angle just so that it starts to pour down the caramel. Then you can pick it up and gently tip it just to make sure that you are evenly distributing that chocolate side to side. You can't simply tip it and let it run all the way down, otherwise you will have gaps along the edge, and then once your chocolate has already reached the bottom, you won't be able to push it back up, and then you won't have that nice clean sheen. So make sure you don't have any bubbles in your piping bag, and just cut the tiniest little tip off, because you don't want to have the white chocolate gush out. You want to just put some thin lines zigzagged up and down. And then using a toothpick or a skewer, go the opposite way, nice and quickly, back and forth. And that's in the fridge for roughly half an hour to have that chocolate set. And then you can pull it out of the fridge, out of the baking tin, onto a cutting surface, and then carefully pulling off the parchment paper. Do it ever so gently. You can leave the slice out for 10-15 minutes just so it's not sticking to the slice so much, because you'll end up having tears. If you have nice hot water out of the faucet, that's great. Otherwise, boil the kettle, because you're going to want to pour hot water over the knife so you can just cut through the chocolate surface, because you don't want to drag the chocolate down onto the sides of the slice. And now you've got your lines through the chocolate. You can clean the knife off and cut all the way through the caramel slice. And you can see that it's not flat against the edge of the pan there, so there's a bit of an incline, but the center will be much neater. Time for a taste test, I think. Absolutely superb. And there you have it. Caramel slice. Thanks for joining me. See you again soon.